All right, things are cooking up. We got the Christian Kirk trade yesterday. We got a Kurt Hinish renegotiation, the Agumbawale re-signing. Today, Shaq Mason was released. That's going to say that it gets complicated because it's June's first designation. It's a relatively small cap savings, but still going to probably be a lot of action. Some of it might happen during this live stream, so feel free to update me. But I was curious to kind of try to take a look at a more objective look at how people around the league are looking at the Christian Kirk trade for the Houston Texans. Some quick personal news. I will not be the defensive line coach and run game coordinator for Western Michigan University this year. That is Seth Payne, the coach, who's much younger than me. We've had him on our radio show a few times. I've got a bunch of congratulatory texts from a whole lot of people, including former Texans GM Charlie Casserly. Kylie Wong congratulated me on it. So many people. It's been a great way to reconnect as Coach Seth Payne has ascended through the coaching ranks. God, if he becomes a head coach at Alabama someday or something, it's going to be awesome. Don't worry, I'm not pulling a Doug Gottlieb. I'm not going to try to be a full-time radio host, part-time YouTube streamer, and full-time Western Michigan defensive line coach. Good guy though. He was a defensive lineman in college too. So he was a defensive lineman named Seth Payne, who was playing at a smaller school. I can't remember where. Thank you. I like to think that maybe there's a little bit of just name recognition, the shine that goes. I was always the kind of player that coaches liked more than scouts. So there might be some coaches that are like, oh yeah, Seth Payne, let's get him in here. And then there's the awkward moment where there's like, oh, okay. I had my brother-in-law's name is Brian Leftwich, not Byron Leftwich. And whenever he visited me in Jacksonville, he got reservations immediately, and then was faced with disappointed Mater D's. So let's look at a few of these grades. I don't even know who the first one I have here is. Oh, the thumbnail, real quick. I could not get a high-definition version of the original Hot for Teacher, so I instead got Cameron Diaz from the movie Bad Teachers, something that I have not watched. But I did have to explain to my wife that I was watching Hot for Teacher over and over and over again for work. Brandy, it's for work. Stop asking me so many questions. Do you care about my job? First, let's go with Seth Walder. I like Seth Walder. He's from ESPN, and he graded this trade. We'll give the grade at the end of this, but a few of the bullet points. Kirk was once the poster child for what we thought was NFL free agency overpay. Fast forward a few years to Tutu Atwell getting a one-year, $10 million deal with the Rams. Yeah, the Rams who are shedding salary in a lot of ways, but not afraid to play Tutu Atwell on a short-term contract. The short-term part of it's huge, and that's going to play into what we talk about here with the Texans trade. Hold on, I've got too big an ego to be that minimized. So suddenly Kirk schedules $16.5 million in cash, which was apparently too rich for the Jaguars since they were preparing to release him. Looks like kind of a bargain. His original deal, by way of reference, was 4 years, $72 million. So that's $18 million a year, right? So, yep, $18 million a year. And getting it on a one-year deal would be the difference there, is that the amount of guaranteed money and everything else, how it might hurt you in the future, is a big part of why that would be considered a good deal. Now, for what Christian Kirk offered in 2022, if he could replicate that, his first year of the contract, it would be an outstandingly good deal. I think we all expect that there's probably going to be some kind of a renegotiation here, so that'll skew things a little bit. Kirk's value is depressed because of injuries, including a collarbone injury that cut his 2024 season short, which have limited him to 19 games over the past 2 seasons. Yes. And the other was a core muscle injury. Sean Pendergast made a good point this morning. I would be more concerned about the core muscle injury if that was the one that had happened in 2024. The fact that that happened in 2023 and it doesn't seem to be an issue would suggest, okay, this isn't going to be one of those lingering Benny Jopru core muscle injury type of things. Deep cut there for the hardcore Texans fans. Over the past 2 seasons, he's averaging 2.1 yards per route and 2.4 against man, which ranks 23rd and 19th among wide receivers with at least 500 routes run in that span. Not bad. You get an exclamation point out of Seth Walder. Over the past 2 years combined, he has a 65 open score. I don't know what that means in our receiver tracking metrics. Good. Oh, that's good. Though poor catch and yardage after catch. slot receiver. I'm not too worried about the yardage after the catch. So he gives A- from Seth Walder, a notoriously hard grader. I don't know if that's true. And the Jaguars, a C+. I think that's about fair. I think the fact that the Jaguars got anything at all for a guy that they were going to release, you give them, all right, that's a good average. You know what? I might even give them a B-. I think people are being kind of tough on the Jaguars. If you get anything at all for a guy you're about to release, even though it's a 2026 7th-round pick, I tend to figure like that's a good professional James Gladstone, the 34-year-old GM, type of move for a team to make. Now he traded it to a team in his own division and the better team in his own division. Nick Caserio with James Gladstone was he popped his trade cherry. Nick Caserio did. And I would imagine James Gladstone, just by way of the way he speaks with so many buzzwords and like, trying real hard to sound intelligent, I bet he respects and has studied the New England Patriots, and he probably looks up at Nick Caserio as one of the guys that's been doing it a long time. And hopefully what we have here is Caserio fleecing a younger dude without that guy even knowing it. It's not a fleece. It's next year, next year's 7th-round pick is a good price for any kind of trade. So that was it. So he gives him an A-. Let's go to, this is Jeff Howe from For the Win. Christian Kirk grades, Texans get needed depth. Jaguars deal another wide receiver in the division. All right. He's not going to give a letter grade. I can respect that. The letter grades are kind of bogus. I get it. Kirk can make up to $16.5 million in the final year of his contract, which is perfectly reasonable for a second receiver. After the Rams rewarded Tutu Atwell earlier in the day with a 1-year, $10 million contract, it can be reasonably expected Kirk would have drawn something comparable to his original terms on the open market. And really, he may have drawn a deal with guaranteed money into the second year. Kirk's injuries are a concern, but he's still in his prime. If he's healthy, this will wind up being a solid acquisition for Houston. The Texans should still be in the receiver market after this, though. Okay, some good points there by Jeff Howe. Let's go from last to first. Texans should still be in the receiver market after this. I think that might include the draft. I think the way the wide receiver market is right now, that's one of the reasons the Texans executed this trade, is there is a lot of thirst for wide receivers out there. Tutu Atwell, $10 million, that I think a lot of guys are going to get overpaid. I told you yesterday, Texans cap estimates that Cooper Kupp, under normal circumstances, would be about a $9 to $12 million a year receiver, and Texans cap is pretty good at this stuff. I'm not going to be surprised if he gets more than that. I think that Devontae Adams is going to probably get more than people expect. I think Stephon Diggs, although it might come a little bit later, is going to get more than you would traditionally expect because DK Metcalf comes with a boatload of high draft picks potentially, and then also $30 million per year. Chris Godwin's going to get a lot of money, but it sounds like Tampa's really desperate to get him back and want to let him test the market and then might re-sign him. That's the going scuttlebutt for whatever that's worth. But beyond those two guys, there aren't a lot of marquee options out there. And part of that's because teams are retaining their own wide receivers these days. So I think getting out ahead of the market is a good deal. But are the Texans going to renegotiate the deal? And that's really where it's hard to grade this until you see if Nick restructures the deal, and if he does restructure it, does it come with a pretty healthy contract? And then the injuries start to make you a lot more nervous because he's a smaller guy who's been banged up for the last 2 years. He was relatively healthy for a few years before that. Early in his career, he had some issues, but when he was healthy in 2022, he was very, very good. The other one I would touch on from that last point was they called him a second receiver. It gets dicey. I mean, wide receiver 2 is more of a fantasy term. I think that when you're talking about a slot receiver, he's a genuine slot receiver. He takes 75% of his snaps in the slot, as opposed to Tank Dell, who takes more snaps outside than he does inside. Tank Dell is not a classic conventional slot receiver. Maybe Bobby Slowick could have developed him and used him more in that regard, but this is more of a genuine slot receiver. So then it becomes, hey, in any given game, Christian Kirk might be your number one. Noah Brown, if they retained him to be a guy that could play, or assigned him to be a guy who could play on the outside, he might be your number one in any given game. Like, Nico Collins is always going to be your number one in terms of the guy you're game planning for and you're trying to target. But that opens up things for guys like Noah Brown and Christian Kirk. So obviously Nico Collins is your number one wide receiver. I just think that depending on who's on the outside opposite of Nico Collins, you don't have to designate two or three. One guy's a slot receiver and one guy's another outside guy. Okay, so the Jaguars trade grade. It's something. It's nice to recoup a pick for a player who's going to be released, especially free money. This one comes with more risk, though, as the Texans wrested away the AFC South from the Jaguars. That's right. They went and they took what was theirs. It's curious for the Jaguars to send a good player to the team they're chasing when the late round future draft compensation won't pay dividends for at least a couple of seasons, if at all. If at all is a big one there. Or the pick could give Jags an extra trade chip to move up the board next month. From a GM standpoint, James Gladstone is doing professional GM types of things. It's fun to think of like, what's a 7th round pick really worth? That's the pocket change that you use to not just to have trades like this, but sometimes it's those 6th and 7th round picks that you add into a trade to balance things out. Most people in the NFL are working off of that old Jimmy Johnson trade chart, and they've tweaked it a little bit, but they've got a points value assigned to each draft pick. So when you start trading with other teams, you make the points match up. And it's almost like an exchange rate. So sometimes you got to add in a 6th or a 7th round pick to make the trade make sense. And so that's something that good non-34-year-old GMs do. Maybe Kirk would have wound up with the Texans after his release anyway. Maybe he would have even signed for less money than he's owed on the balance of the current deal. I'd be surprised with that. I think Kirk, if he was going to be a free agent, was definitely going to get more than $16.5 million. I think that if he got something for $10 million per year or higher than that, I mean, anywhere between $10 and $20 million per year right now, is all in play. The amount of guaranteed money probably would have measured up. So I guess the question is Christian Kirk upset at all that he missed out on the chance for free agency? If in his mind he's thinking, I'm going to get a 3-year, $45 million deal, and with a good chunk of guaranteed money, and then all of a sudden he goes to a team that has a great young quarterback. I haven't seen a single skill position player in the NFL that's down on C.J. Stroud yet, or a former quarterback or film analyst or anything like that. But with a new offensive coordinator, so you don't really know what's up like with that, but you get to play opposite of Nico Collins. I think he'll be happy with the situation, but he might agitate for a new deal. This is what comes with the territory. So that was it. Oh, yeah, I've got one more, but let me get to some comments first. We might not get to that one. So Shaq Mason, because he's the June 1st designation gets a little bit tricky. You can divide the cap savings up, but you don't get all of those cap savings immediately. So some of those cap savings you can't use until after June 1st, but it does create more space. And I think more than anything, I think Shaq Mason is a guy that his play declined. It wasn't as good when he went to Tampa, where he had been great when he was in New England, working with Nick Caley and Popovich as well. Remember, that not directly with Nick Caley, but in that same system, he was really, really good. Went to Tampa, wasn't as good. Came to Houston. Well, I mean, still wasn't as good as he was in New England, but maybe is about what he was in Tampa. And then just the last couple of years, I think through a combination of injuries and just aging, he hasn't been the same guy. And my only theory behind that would be, for a guy that's 31, he aged faster than I thought he would. The injuries matter, but you also get injured more as you get older. He's 6'1", and all credit to him for making it as long as he has so far as a 6'1" guard in the NFL. That's impressive, but maybe the drop off in athleticism or durability, it might have been small, but when you're 6'1", that's a big difference when you're a scrappy dude, because we haven't really seen the scrappy version of Shaq Mason. So I could never bring myself to be angry at Shaq Mason. I was a little angry after Tavondre Sweat swatted him aside, but kind of like when you try to watch Matt Schaub throw to the sideline in his waning days with the Texans. there was a point where I just started feeling bad for him because you could tell that he couldn't physically do it the same way. But I think, look, it's very clear that they're going to look for an improvement on the interior offensive line now. If they saw fit to make Shaq Mason the starter, including in the playoffs when a lot of us were wondering, like, man, I don't know, should Juice Scruggs be starting at this point at right guard? That they're going to make a change. So there's going to be somebody added via free agency or the draft. I hope at least one of them by free agency and then another one in the draft. Yes, Shaq is gone, or at least it's announced that it will be happen. I hope restructuring Tunsil don't be a hassle, won't be a hassle. Yeah, and I don't think with Tunsil it'll be anything that the Texans do that affects them too hardcore long term. Let's see. I imagine they'll be using the Shaq Mason savings for a Stingley extension if we don't see it immediately. I mean, that's a long ways out. I think the Stingley extension. When was Nico's extension announced? It was relatively early by some of those third-year extensions. I mean, Deshaun Watson's was towards the end of training camp, if I remember correctly, and I don't get too worried about that. I think that the Texans do a good job of keeping things in-house. Typically, when they extend a player who's got 1 year left on his deal, it's radio silence. There's no leaks. There's no nothing. I think the agents know that the Texans don't want them leaking anything. Stingley doesn't seem like the kind of guy who's going to agitate. And before you get worried about Mulligetta, let's remember who did the extension with Deshaun Watson the first time. That was David Mulligetta. So Mulligetta represents Derek Stingley. Stingley ain't going to get screwed over in the deal with David Mulligetta as his client, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a dramatic thing. Kirk is a very Stroud-friendly receiver, great wide receiver 3. Let's get our 2, Ibuka. Ibuka is interesting because he doesn't excite me the way a lot of other guys do, but I understand where the Texans might like him. I'd feel really good about Ibuka in the second round. I'm still a little bit nervous that he's just not elite athletically enough, but especially now that you have a slot receiver, you don't. The key thing about going into the draft is ideally you feel pretty good about all your position groups that you could start a game that Sunday with the guys you have on the roster, because that does put you in a position to go more purely best player available. So let's say they bring in 1 interior offensive lineman and 1 defensive tackle, some reasonably priced starting caliber guys. Then when you get to the 25th pick, you don't have to feel like, oh boy, I'd really like a receiver here. You can just genuinely take the best player available. I think they're in that situation with receiver right now with the addition of Christian Kirk. I think if they, oh my gosh, Kevin Zeitler, the guard for the Lions last year, he ended up playing like one of the best guards in the league. He was on a 1-year, $6 million a year contract from the Lions. Like it does not take a huge hit it out of the ballpark type of signing on the interior offensive line to get better. You take Kevin Zeitler from last year and put him on the Texans. I don't know. He wouldn't have been as good as he was with the Lions because the Lions knew what they were doing offensively. But interior offensive line can be exciting almost just because you can get veterans but remain frugal. And it's also fun to get excited about big fat guys. That's what excites me. Big fatties. I'm a fatty chaser. Love the offensive lineman. Everybody always says that. Jimmy Sun, my old college teammate, and we were in the same fraternity, which was a bit DU at Cornell. It used to be like the football house. It was basically almost like an athletic dorm for football players. A few lacrosse players and basketball players, but by and large, mostly football players. So Jimmy, thanks for watching. And Seth, and for any of you that missed the intro, the Seth Payne that got hired to be the Western Michigan defensive line coach is not this Seth Payne right here. It's fun to watch Caserio work during the offseason. Seems like he has a finger on the pulse of the whole league. This is where Daryl Morey and Nick Caserio are a little bit similar. You think about the James Harden trade. The James Harden trade, looking back on it, you fans of NBA teams are wondering, why were we not in on this? Like, I didn't even know this was a possibility. Yeah, and there are a lot of GMs that didn't know it was a possibility. Morey is working the phone and working the texts all the time. And Caserio, likewise, because he's so active, because he loves to trade. I think because, and this is important too, the whole winning and losing trades thing in the NFL is always kind of funny because at the end of the day, these GMs want to have good working relationships with other GMs. So the guys that get a lot of deals tend to be guys that, you know, are honest and straightforward, and they're going to tell you the pluses and minuses of a player and all of that. Like Nick's not trying to rake anybody over the coals at any given time, because that's when people don't want to do business with you. So just by virtue of being constantly active and looking and talking to people, I think you get deals like this. You know, and obviously this isn't this. I'm going to make a bold prediction. This will not be as notable as the James Harden trade, but I do like a GM compared to, remember, Brian Gain was the exact opposite. Brian Gain looked almost at times like he was very hesitant to trade, especially within the draft. And Caserio's the exact opposite. Yeah, and Golden, Ibuka, and Luther, those guys seem to be the most common wide receivers sent to the Texans right now. I'm not going to be upset about Ibuka whatsoever. I mean, for one, he's done it at a high level at a school that tends to produce some pretty damn good wide receivers. But all the intangibles are off the charts. They talk about him almost, it sounds like some of the stuff that they used to say about Will Anderson at Alabama. So I like that a lot. And also, by the way, Tyler Booker, the offensive guard from Alabama, apparently is like the offensive line version of Will Anderson. So the balance of character and skill, Ibuka, don't get me wrong, I think I would be happy with it. I just get more excited about the just extreme athleticism of the other guys. Let's see. In the life of Colby, you'll have to go back and then like and subscribe while you're at it. Clinton and Ron were saying they want Tyler Warren. Would you want 4 tight ends? No, I don't want 4 tight ends, but I do want to trade one of them away. So that puts you in an interesting situation. Do I want Tyler Warren? But I also, I don't want to trade up for Tyler Warren. I think it's easy to say you want Tyler Warren, but do you really want to trade all the way up to 12 or 13 to get Tyler Warren? Not necessarily. Again, going back to the boring stuff. And I said something on Twitter yesterday where I said, look, basically, I don't want DK Metcalf because I would rather have 3 guys who make $10 million a year on this team right now. We've seen Texans teams before. Let me get this out of here, by the way. We've seen Texans teams before that are top heavy, and it's not fun, man. It feels like you're perennially wasting all of this great talent you have, whether it be Arian Foster or Andre Johnson or J.J. Watt or whomever else. And right now, this team needs to be more well-rounded. You take DK Metcalf and you stick him next to Nico Collins. Yeah, that's freaking awesome. But it does very little for you if you can't pass protect, if you can't run the football, if you can't do all the things that the Texans couldn't do last year. We saw that, and we still don't know if Nick Caley is a good offensive coordinator yet or not. So and the Texans aren't in. I mean, if you want to pretend the cap isn't real, and which people love to do this time of year, and say, well, why not? Why not sign and trade, mind you, for DK Metcalf? Why not give up a first and a second rounder and pay $30 million a year to DK Metcalf? But I also want you to draft 7 starters with 3 draft picks in the 4th round. And I also want you to go out and get a top-of-the-market guard and a top-of-the-market defensive tackle. You just can't do it. It's a hard time of year. I feel like I'm being a withholding parent, but it's for our own good, damn it. Okay, so you would have to, if he was there, would I get him? Yeah, that's a no-brainer. I don't think Tyler Warren's at 25 unless they find out he's been doing fentanyl or selling fentanyl. If they find out he's doing fentanyl, they'll be like, he performed pretty well on fentanyl. We clean him up. My God, we've got Gronk on our hands. If he's dealing fentanyl, that's different, man. All right, these are people's lives at stake, okay? All right? Crimes against oneself, I've got tolerance for. Crimes against humanity, I don't want them. Listen, maybe that's a polarizing take, but if Tyler Warren is a fentanyl dealer, then no, I don't want him. I don't think that. So I think it's I don't think that's a realistic hypothetical. If he's there at 25, yes, take him. Unless it fell because he's a fentanyl dealer. Let's see. Do not sell our financial soul for a single receiver that kills the season if he gets injured. So no team would take on the Schultz contract. Now, a team might take on the Schultz contract if the Texans take some of his salary or pay some of his salary. And that's where it gets enticing. That, Schultz 2 years ago played a lot better than he did last year. We don't know exactly what his injury situation was, but there are avenues where you could get a draft pick for him. Brevin Jordan's here on a nice deal. He re-upped. For those of you who missed it, he re-upped. It was during the season, I believe, well injured. I like his upside and some of the flashes he's shown. Maybe Nick Caley can unlock a lot of that. And Cade Stover, I'm still waiting and seeing. I'm optimistic about it. I think he's got a lot of potential in him, hopefully to be a blocker, especially with some good instruction and in the right scheme. And if they brought in a different tight end, if they draft a tight end in the first round, then I think there's a really oh boy, I don't want to talk about it. You lose the veteran presence of Dalton Schultz. All right, I got to get running. I got to go make sausages. They expire today, and I cannot give my wife food poisoning again. If you haven't already, subscribe, tell a friend. I just saw this. Saw some outsider perspective saying Texans don't have a great RB2 outside of Mixon. Seems like the organization kind of disagrees with extending Dare. Do you think they draft any running backs this year or possibly next? I think they like Dare as a special teamer and as a guy that can come in specific situations to be used for pass protection or as a receiver, but they don't look at him as a genuine backup running back or a guy that I think that you'd want in there for 25 snaps if Joe Mixon went down. The thing that at this point I have no idea about is how they feel about Dameon Pierce. Is Dameon Pierce a guy that they genuinely believe that, hey, with the right offensive coordinator, with Pep Hamilton, he looked a hell of a lot better than he has looked these last 2 years, and that if they're running more of a power scheme, more duo, more inside zone, give me a counter tray here and there, then maybe. But I think they might draft a running back higher this year. All right, now I'm leaving. Now you've done it. So again, subscribe. Everything. Thanks, everybody.